Today, we're unlocking the secret sauce of cinematic video, manual exposure. I'm about to transform how you see light forever. Guys, no more auto mode nonsense. No more footage that looks like it was shot on a potato. I'm about to blow your mind with the secrets to perfect exposure every single time. This right here, this is the video that's going to change everything for you. The one you'll look back on and say, that's when it all clicked. So grab your camera, grab your coffee, and let's get after it. First, let's take a second to clarify exactly what exposure means. Simply put, it's the amount of light that hits your camera's sensor. Too much light, the image looks blown out. Too little light, it's hard to see any details. But when you get it just right, that's where the magic happens. I want you to think of exposure like baking a cake. Too much sugar, it's way too sweet. Not enough, it's really bland. The perfect amount creates a masterpiece. And lucky for us, there's a recipe for perfect exposure. It's called the exposure triangle. The exposure triangle is made up of 3 settings: your aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. Here's a quick breakdown, and then we'll talk more about how they all work together with some practical examples thrown in. Number 1 is your aperture. This is also commonly referred to as your f-stop. Think of this like a window in a room. A big window, which would correlate with a small f-stop like f1.8, lets in a lot of light and gives you that dreamy blurred background. A small window, which would be a higher f-stop like f8 or f16, lets in less light and keeps everything sharp like for landscapes. Number 2 is your shutter speed. Imagine opening and closing a curtain. A fast shutter speed like 1/1000 is going to freeze motion in its place. A slow shutter speed like 1/30 lets in more light, but it can blur motion because that shutter is open for a longer period of time. Now remember, if you're shooting at 24 frames per second, it's capturing each individual frame at 1/1000th of a second or 1/30th of a second, 24 times per second. So the video itself will appear choppy at 1/1000 because each individual frame is very crisp and doesn't retain a natural amount of motion blur for your scene. And the video will be very blurry at 1/30 because each individual frame will have a 1/30th of a second shutter speed 24 times per second. And lastly, your ISO. This is your light sensitivity. Think of it as turning up a dimmer switch. Higher ISO makes your image brighter, but crank it too high and you can get grainy, noisy footage. There is no actual technical mechanism that is affected when lowering or increasing your ISO. It's more just a digital brightening and darkening of your image. All right, team, now this is where the magic happens. Let me show you how to mix these ingredients together for that mouth-watering cinematic look. Here's your step-by-step recipe for perfect exposure. Number 1, lock in your shutter speed. Here's the golden rule: double your frame rate. Let me say it again: double your frame rate. This is the secret sauce. Shooting at 24 frames per second, lock that shutter at 1/50. 60 frames per second, bump it to 1/125. Why? Too fast and your footage looks like a choppy action movie. Too slow, welcome to Dizzy Town. But hit that sweet spot, pure cinematic gold. Number 2, master your aperture. This is where you get to be the artist. Want that dreamy, buttery background that makes your subject pop? Open wide to f2.8. Need everything crystal clear? Crank it up to f8 or f11. The choice is yours. And number 3, your safety net, your ISO. Think of ISO as your emergency backup. Keep it low for that clean, crisp look, and only crank it up when you absolutely need to, like during a romantic first dance or like a dimly lit reception. These 3 are like a band. They need to work together to create that perfect harmony. But hang on, what if you've got everything dialed in perfectly, but your image is still way too bright? Don't panic, you've got 2 secret weapons. Option A is bump up that aperture, which will sacrifice some of that blurry background. Or B, you can slap on an ND filter. Think of these bad boys as sunglasses for your lens. Go ahead and drop a sun emoji in the comments if you want a deep dive on ND filters in the next video. Okay gang, here comes the real pro stuff. The camera has some absolutely insane built-in superpowers that most people don't even know about. See this little graph right here? This is your histogram. your new best friend. Think of it like your exposure's heartbeat monitor. When it's squished to the left, your shot's basically hiding in the shadows. Pushed to the right, you're blinding everyone. But when it's balanced, pure perfection. But hang on, there's more. Let me introduce you to your exposure guardian angel, zebras. When you see these funky stripes pop up, it's like your camera screaming, "Whoa there, hotshot. Too bright." Trust me, these zebras will save your footage from looking like it was shot on the surface of the sun.
All right guys, so what we're doing here is I want to give you kind of a practical run through of what it looks like to set your exposure properly. So this is going to be kind of just a practical demonstration showing you what I kind of think through as I set my exposure manually. So if you look at this, I want to have this scene of this Traeger against the background of a kind of cloudy sky, but just a brighter background in general. So right now, the first thing I'm looking at is I want a balanced image, especially if you pull up this histogram right here, you can see everything is pushed way to the right. You can also see that everything's just really blown out in the background, and even the foreground, the subject is a little blown out. So what I want to do is overall darken this image, but I still have to maintain the principles that we're talking about when setting manual exposure. So first thing I'm going to want to do is I'm shooting at 24 frames a second, so I want to lock in my shutter speed at double that, right? So I'm at 1/50. I want to keep that right where it's at. Now I would like to have a blurry background in this image. This lens only goes down to f2.8, so I want to try and keep it there. And then my base ISO is 640 on this camera. I can go down to 160. It's still bright, but your base ISO is your best bet to get the most dynamic range out of your camera. So I actually want to keep this at 640. Now, this is ideally what I would want my image to look like. However, you can see it's blown out. So what we're gonna do is kind of what we talked about earlier. We're gonna throw on an ND filter to try and cut out some of that light and see where it gets us. So all right, so that's with that ND filter on. You can see now we're maybe even a little bit underexposed. So just as a demonstration on what these ND filters can do is you rotate it like that. There's different strengths of neutral density that you can add to that image. So I'm gonna start at 5 stops of light. Let's bring it back just a little bit there. Maybe even a little bit more. It's probably too bright. Now I'm gonna pull up this histogram again. You can still see we're clipping way over to the right there. So I wanna bring it down, and there we go, that pulls it. Pulls those highlights down just a little bit to where they're not clipping. So right about there is kind of where I'm thinking I want that image to land. Come down maybe one more. There we go, and that's pretty balanced. So kind of a quick recap. We want to keep that at 1/50 for that shutter speed since we're shooting at 24 frames per second. Keep that natural motion blur. f2.8, which means I got a really blurry background. It kind of isolates that subject of your image. And then I'm at my base ISO, which is 640. Now I'm shooting in a log profile. So if you're shooting in a normal picture profile, that might be different. And to be honest, every camera is different. They have a different base ISO depending on the camera. So figure out what yours is and try to keep it at that. But if you are not shooting in a picture profile at all, I would just recommend to keep it at the lowest it goes. So probably ISO 100. But for this one, this is the perfect image for me that I want for this specific scene.
And there you have it. You've just unlocked the secrets to perfect exposure. Now it's time to put these pro tips into action. I've got a challenge for you. Grab your camera this week, post your best shot in the comments below with hashtag exposure master, and I'll personally review the top 3 in next week's video. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications so you don't miss it. And if this video helped you level up your game, smash that like button to help other creators find these tips. Until next time, keep creating.